Hello, I'm David Bowman, the Executive Director of the Four Corners Regional Education Cooperative #1. And we're continuing our series of simple, fun, and very useful techniques with Photoshop. As you're looking at creating websites or flyers or brochures or newsletters or anything like that, where you are putting pictures in place, you'll find these techniques useful to help your final products look as high quality, interesting, and professional as possible. In this session today, in this Tech Bits, we're going to be looking at creating a vignette, and we're going to talk about some cropping techniques as well, so you get images of the right size and shape. Here, we're going to be looking at taking this image that we've got as a sample image and turning it into a vignette like this. And lots of fun things to do along the way as we're preparing this image. So let's go ahead and get started. Now, the first thing that I always do is simply to create a copy of the original image, because if for some reason I do something completely nutty and ruin it, I want to make sure that the original is still in place. So with my layer panel open and my background selected, I'm simply going to click Control J or Command J for folks on Macs. In fact, whenever I say Control something, which is for PCs, Mac folks can swap out in their minds Command plus that keystroke. So I'll be using Control, Mac folks use Command. Okay, so here we have a nice picture of a family in the woods. The first thing that we're going to do, now that we've duplicated the layer, is we are going to define the shape for the vignette around them. And it's quite simple to do. So I'm going to come up here to my toolbar, and I see over here, I've got my shapes menu. If I click and hold, I've got rectangle, ellipsis, triangle, and so on. We're going to use the ellipsis. And all I'm going to do is click and drag to create a selection, just a rough selection of that ellipsis. And currently it's being filled with black. Honestly, it doesn't matter, because we're going to be hiding it later anyway. We're just trying to define the shape of what's going to show through. So let me go back to layers, bring my opacity down quite a bit so I can see what's behind it. And I'll bring it down to, 35. Kind of doesn't matter. All right, now using the handles around it, I can resize it and move it around pretty much however I want to make it look the way I want it to look. So let's bring it up a little bit, and let's bring it out a little bit, and a little bit there. All right, I'm going to call that good, but let me grab my move tool and just kind of slide it around till it's where I want it to be. I think that's lovely. All right, back to my ellipse tool. I'm going to bring up the bottom a little bit. Okay, so I now have the shape that is going to be revealed when I create my ellipsis, or when I create my vignette, and I'll hit enter. For now, we can actually just hide that layer. We're not going to need it again except to create a selection. So let me go ahead and hide it. And it doesn't need to be showing up for us to use it later. Now back to my layer 1, which is my copy of the background. On top of this, I'm going to put a color fill, which is going to create the frame around this image. So I go to my adjustment layers panel, which is down here at the bottom of my layers menu. And I'm going to choose solid color. Now, looking at my menu here, let's see. I've got my hue slider here, and I'm going to choose something kind of in the oranges range. Now, Here on my color selector, I can go right and left, which is saturation, how much of that color is being applied, and I can move it up and down for lighter and darker, all the way down to black. I'm going to choose, for this case, kind of a dark orange. I think that'll look nice, sort of a fall theme going on here. All right, and okay. Well, we're getting there, but you're probably thinking, I cannot see the image at all right now. And this is where that ellipsis comes in handy. See, if I click on the ellipsis, if I do Control click, what it will do, what Photoshop will do, is create a selection around whatever's in that layer. And the only thing in that layer is the circle, the oval that I created. And now I've selected it. So what I want to do is I want to get that new color fill out of that area. So if we look on the layer panel, over here, I've got my color fill layer. And right now the color is selected. But next to it is the mask, which shows where is this effect being applied. And with your masks, anything that is white, the effect will show up. Anything that is black on the mask is basically masked out. It's hidden, so the effect will not show up there. Let me show you how that works, just very, very quickly. Control D to unselect. So right now, I have the mask selected. I've selected on the mask. And I am going to simply paint with black on the mask. And you'll see that wherever I paint with black, that's going to hide the effect. So I've got a brush tool. Let me actually make it a little bit bigger. And if I paint with black, the effect will not be applied there. Now, I'm going to Alt-click on the mask layer, which will show me just the mask. So I have painted with black on the mask, and by doing so, I'm saying these are areas where this effect will not be applied. So let me click back on the color layer, and you'll see I can now see through the effect because it's being hidden in those areas. Okay, so that's how masks work. Let me go ahead and fill this with white. All right, so the mask is now white. So what I want to do is I want to take the shape of that ellipsis, and on the mask, fill that area with black, which is pretty simple to do. To get a selection of that shape, all I have to do is Control and click on the layer. And anything that's in that layer will be selected, which is the ellipsis in this case. So now I have the selection of the area that I want to be revealed, the picture underneath. Now, making sure I'm in my mask over here, I'm going to fill that selection with black to say, don't apply the effect here. So I see over here next to my control panel menu, down below my tools, I have my foreground color, which is black, my background color, which is white. I want to fill this with black. To do that, I will simply, let's see, foreground color, Alt, backspace. Alt, backspace will fill a selection with your foreground color. So Alt, backspace to fill with the foreground color, in this case, black. Just as a quick point of reference, if I do Control, backspace, it will fill with the background layer. But I want the foreground layer because that's black right now. So Alt, backspace. And now on the mask, you will see that area is in black, which means the effect will not be applied there. All right, let me get rid of my selection. That's Control D, D for deselect. All right, so now I've got my vignette. However, if we look at it again, that's really harsh. Maybe that's the effect that you're looking for. But if you want something where it kind of fades out, a little softer edge, then there's a couple of extra steps we need to do. So while I still have the mask selected, what I want to do is I want to blur it, which means any edge is going to get softer. It's going to be diffused. I want to blur this very hard edge. So with the mask selected, I'm going to go up to my menu at the top, and you're going to see a menu called Filter. And one of the items on the filter menu is blur. And the type of blur that we want is called Gaussian blur. Now, once I've selected that, I get a little control panel shows up, and I can select how many pixels will be diffused. Like, how deep is the diffusion here? And I'm going to choose a fairly high number because this is a somewhat high resolution image. It's a really big image. You'll need to play with it and see what works for you. If I go very, very high, you can see there's a great amount of diffusion or blurring in this case. That's more than what we want. I'm going to go somewhere in the, not too bad. Let's call it 130. I think that's going to look nice. And, okay. So now I've created my vignette. And let's take a look, and you can see where all that blurring is occurring through here. And it's the right size, and it's the right shape, and I like how much blur we've got, or how much diffusion we have around that edge. So that's great. Okay. Let me go back to screen size. Come on. There we go. Fit on screen. Now, a couple of quick things. So we're basically done. What we need to do now is crop it into the appropriate size and shape, the whole image, which we'll do in just a moment. But I'm looking at this thinking, now that I've kind of isolated these folks in the image, I'm not really satisfied with the amount of contrast between the people and their background. I don't have all that other stuff around them that makes it obvious to my eye what I should be focusing on. So I want to kind of bump up the colors a little bit of my subjects because they are a little bit dark. So if I want to do that, my preferred method, there's several ways to do it. My preferred method is to add a curves adjustment layer. So back down here on my layer menu, my layer panel, back down here where I've got my adjustment layers, I'm going to choose curves. And what I'm looking at over here on the left-hand side is what is the blackest black, and up here on the right-hand side is what is whitest white, and it's a straight line. I mean, it's a bit more technical than that, but basically how much light is being applied to the darks and how much is being applied to the whites. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this horizontal line. This diagonal line. I'm going to grab it somewhere down here on the darker end, and I'm going to simply bump it up just a hair. Like that. Okay, let me turn off this color layer so you can see more what is actually happening. So here is before, and here is after. Everything's bright. But remember, I'm trying to get some contrast between my subjects and all the stuff behind them. So let me move some things around first of all. Let me just take this curves layer, and I'm going to put it on top of the actual image itself. All right, so there's before and there's after. But what you'll see is everything is getting brightened. I want that effect, that brightening, to only affect the people and not all the stuff around them, which means I've got to isolate the people and apply the effect only to them. Well, there's lots of ways to make a selection. Pen tool, quick select tool, magic wand, lasso, lots of ways to do it. And normally I would say if you want to select something, go get your pen tool and do the work necessary. But this is a picture of people. And Photoshop is a really cool and very good way to pick out the subjects in a picture. So here's how we're going to do it. I am going to, first I'm going to turn off the curves. Okay. Now I'm going to select the layer with the people in it. I'm going to grab any one of my easy selection tools up here. Object selection, quick selection, or magic wand. Doesn't matter which one. Because whenever I select any of those, I have a new feature up top, a menu item, which is for select subject. Now I've got a couple of options. I've got, if I click on the little down arrow, I can say, just use my own computer processing to do it. And it's faster, but it's not as accurate. The second option is for cloud application, which is basically just send the image out to the cloud, see what looks similar, and using similar pictures, create the selection on this one. And it's going to be more accurate. So I am going to select cloud. And then all I need to do at this point is say select subject. And it will take a bit of time, depending on your internet speed and your processing speed and all that. So this is where we just kind of stare and look at each other awkwardly until it's done. Okay, it's done. You'll see I now have a selection around my subjects. What I want to do is isolate them. And since it's pretty good, I'm just going to create a new layer with just those people in it. Well, to create a new layer or to create a duplicate of a selection, on my keyboard, I will do Control J, which basically says if the whole layer, nothing is selected in particular, Control J is going to make a duplicate of the layer. But I have some areas selected, so I'm going to make a duplicate of just the selected area, which is the people. So Control J, and now you'll see I have a new layer that showed up in my layer menu. And if I turn off the original layer, the new layer just has the people in it. So now that I've got a layer with just the people in it, what I can do is take that curves layer and say only apply it to whatever's in the layer below it, which is just the people. We're creating something called a clipping mask. To create that functionality, I will simply over here on the right-hand side of the layer, right-click, and there's an option called Create Clipping Mask. Create Clipping Mask says only apply this to whatever's on the layer below it, which is just the people. So create clipping mask, and I get a little down arrow next to the effect on my layer menu, which says this layer is being clipped to the layer below it, which is the people. So now let me show you how that's working. Let me take this and just blow it up. And as you'll see, the effect is only being applied to whatever is in the layer below it, which is just the people. Cool, huh? So there and that. I don't know why I would do that, but if I did, the point is you can see that's only being applied there. So now that little bit of brightening is only affecting the people. So I've got a good image now, and I will turn my vignette back on. The other thing we could have done, when I did select subject and it made a selection, on my curves adjustment layer mask, I could have said, make that part white and make the rest of it black, just the way I did with the color fill layer. So if I'd wanted to do it that way, which may be easier. So here, let me turn off this, let me turn off this, and go back to my original layer. I'm going to say cloud, select subject, which will take just a moment. So now I have my selection. With the selection, now when I create my curves layer and do a little brightening of the darks down here like that, you'll see that the curves layer already has a mask in place where the selected areas were white and everything else is black. So there's a couple different ways to do it. One way may be easier than the other. So, but this will also work. When you have a selection in place, when you create an adjustment layer, the adjustment layer will automatically come with a mask where the selected areas are white for the effect and everything else is black, so no effect. So that's another way to do it. And there we go. Okay, so let me turn back on my color fill layer, and now I've got a very nice vignette of these folks. So really the only thing left to do is to crop it and get it ready for printing or for use in some document. So how am I going to crop this? Let's say I want to create an image which has the ratio of 5 wide and 7 high, like 5 inches wide, 7 high, or 10 inches wide and 14 inches. But it's the ratio for every 5 across, 7 up and down. That's my ratio, 5 by 7. So on my tools menu over here, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, the fifth item down is my cropping tool. So I'm going to select that. Now, I have some new options that just showed up. And up here, I have some pre-selected ratios, a 4 by 5 ratio, or 8 by 10, or 12 by 15, or whatever, but it's the ratio. I've got a 2 by 3 ratio. I've got a 16 by 19 ratio, but I want the 5 by 7. And I can switch it if I wanted to by using the back and forth arrows as well. All right, so there's my 5 by 7 ratio. And I'm just going to drag it up and maybe drag it over this way a little bit and move the image to the middle, about like that. Maybe make it a little bit bigger. And when I drag from the corners or the top or the bottom sides, it's going to maintain that exact 5 by 7 ratio. Well, I think this looks about right. And I can drag my image around. I want the little boy in the middle. He's the star of this image for sure. All right, so once I'm satisfied with the crop and the selection, I'm just either going to hit enter on my keyboard or the little check mark up at the top. And now I have my vignette. And how cool is that? So from here, I would generally just say File, Export it as a JPEG or a PNG, but I would export it at this point. And now I've got an image that I can put into my documents. But here's something interesting that we can do. Once we've created our vignette, let's say we want to have lots of pictures with the same vignette in place, all the same settings. Well, I've created it once. I could get rid of the image layers and so on, turn them all off like this, turn everything off, and just leave that color fill, save it, and then I've got a template. And with that template, I can then bring in another image into that. And let me go down a little bit, and you'll see everything is still applied. So I can create a template which I can use over and over and over again, so I have some consistency in the images that I'm using. Very simple. So here's the original one right there, and here's the new one. It's very simple to swap out the images in Photoshop. So I hope you have some fun with this. I hope you find it useful. Again, the point is to help you prepare your electronic and paper documents and all other types of publications so that they look interesting and they look professional. Hope you have a good time with this one. Again, my name is David Bowman. I am the Executive Director of the Four Corners Regional Education Cooperative up here in Farmington, New Mexico, and I hope you have a great day.